So hello and welcome to the New Gig podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Hodgson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor of Economics at the University of Birmingham and also an established author, Siddhartha Bandyopadhyay. How are you doing, Siddhartha?
Thanks very much, Glenn. How are you?
I'm,
I'm
do-
good.
I'm doing well too. So please, give us a little bit of a background on yourself and also the research work that you're doing at the moment, but of course also your latest book as well.
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Glenn. Well, as you said, I'm a professor of economics at the University of Birmingham, but more broadly, I like to think of myself as a multidisciplinary social science scholar, trying to understand and in some cases also hopefully uh, get some answers to some of the pressing social science questions or the social and economic questions.
Yeah.
And of late, I've worked a lot around issues in crime, justice, and policing, issues around workforce transformation, mental health, and sort of working with a team of psychologists, people in public health, and trying to understand the connections between the various disciplines to look at sort of wicked global and national problems.
Yes.
So that's so. For example, not everybody would kind of draw the connection between, for example, mental health and say domestic violence, for instance. Trying
Right.
to find these kind of connections and understanding, sort of what, if you like, broadly what drives a human behavior and how can we have a globalized world that is also equitable. And
Yeah.
that sort of, you asked me to talk about the book, that sort of sparked off, if you like, this collaboration with Ovik Chanda. So Ovik and I, long-time friends, undergraduates together.
Yeah.
We were talking on Zoom during COVID when we all stuck at home. And one of the things I was pointing out is that uh, a lot of people who rely on their networks at work to, sort of get sustenance in terms of kind of driving them. Now, there was one network which was totally cut off from them, or at
Yeah.
least quite strongly cut off from them. And what was the impact of that on the mental health? I mean, would we have a sort of pandemic of, after the pandemic where, people would suffer a lot and there would be this
Yes.
mental health issue? And Obik said, well, that's really interesting because I was thinking of this book around the future of work, which
Right.
I would now have to revisit because of the pandemic, almost to tear out
Yeah.
all my old ideas and start afresh. And would you join? And I don't know, in a mad moment or a good moment or a bad moment, I said yes. And maybe it surprised both of us and we got going with the book.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I can stop now and you can ask me specific questions about the book, or I can describe in a couple of sentences about the book. It's
Yeah, well, I mean, please do describe a little bit about the book. It's a fascinating read, and people who haven't looked at it, I'll put the links in the description as well, so people know where to find it. But it really is a fascinating, not just an academic overview, but it's also looking at the practicalities and the operational aspects around this as well, which I think is really, really interesting, and is something that could be drawn out for different markets as well.
Absolutely, and I think that's why the collaboration is sort of so successful in a way. At least I hope it's successful because you have complementary skills. Vic was in
Yeah,
industry for a long time, an academic, but also somebody who likes to translate policy. I
yeah,
mean, very broadly speaking, the book is about the future of work, but in an era when work, worker, and workplace do not have to be connected in space.
yes,
So this is, previously, these three W's, so to say, would be together. You have a workplace, you have workers who go and do work in their workplace.
yeah,
But today we don't have to, and that links to other things which you can come to later about, the globalized economy and technology, which makes it
right,
possible to, this sort of weightless economy, this exchange of ideas. But what happens, for people during this transition? How do people adapt to this new style of working?
yeah,
Uh, how do you work in a place where, things are changing so quickly that, the things which you thought were really important at work and what you were trained in might turn out to be useless? How do you navigate this? How would a new entrant in the workplace navigate this? How do you look after your mental health in this? And basically, given this globalized milieu, and of course, there's a backlash against it. We can discuss it. How does the quote unquote new workplace be one where you can actually thrive? Because there's a lot of opportunity as well. So that's
Yeah.
sort of what the book is about, and it really offers kind of, that's why you call it a guidebook. How
Yeah.
do you thrive in this new workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, what is the role that we're seeing at the moment in terms of the impact of digitalization on jobs and the world of work, Siddhartha?
Yeah, so I guess there are two things, right? So it's an apparent paradox, right? Because on the one hand, you see these really worrying reports from industry about millions of jobs being displaced. On
Yeah.
the other hand, the same reports tell us that there are so many unfilled vacancies.
Yes.
So why is it that, you have
Yeah.
this mismatch between demand and supply?
Yeah.
And I think one thing could be that, well, digitalization actually opens up a lot of new jobs, but there's a lag in the right people who are trained or equipped to handle this. So those jobs have to go unfilled. On
Yeah.
the other hand, of course, because of digitalization and new ways of working, some of the skills become obsolete and jobs become displaced. So I think that's
Yeah.
one of the effects. But at the same time, digitalization does open up these huge opportunities for working across borders, working globally, doing things which you couldn't before simply because, human beings wouldn't have the capacity or the time to gather that kind of data and draw these kind of links. But
Mm,
it's also, and I think one of the things which we often forget, we keep talking about firms, and the workers adapting to digitalization and technology. What about the consumers, right? I
right.
mean, what about, you have an aging population who are asked to do things, even something simple like banking digitally.
Yeah.
That's not how they have been brought up, right? So, how do they navigate this workplace, this digitalization, this digital revolution, and what can we do to make it supportive for them as well?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think, and that is this idea of sort of a digital divide and a two-tier or even a three-tier society, which is something that really needs to be thought about and looked at to be addressed. Because yeah, we can't have sort of a percentage of the population, whether it's sort of the older people or people from different backgrounds, who don't have access to the technology and therefore the opportunities that are being presented here, Siddhartha.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you know, the digital divide was sort of there for a while, but I think because of COVID, it's really become more prominent. So, for example, during the sort of forced homeschooling that
Yeah.
kids had for 2 or 3 years, there's a huge difference between an upper middle class or a rich family which had, the 3 or 4 laptops, all kinds of equipment that you need to learn digitally,
Yeah.
versus somebody with a bad internet connection trying to learn stuff on a not very good mobile phone. What's
Yes.
going to be the impact of this, not just in the short run, but in the long run, when you track this?
Yeah.
I think that's important. And also, what you talked about, the consumers, the elderly. I mean, they have to really navigate this new world, and they've almost forced to. So I think that's going to be really important, and it's not just the short term. I think I also worry a little about the long term impact. I mean, is it
Right.
just going to increase inequality over the long run? If you look 5 years down the line, would the opportunities sort of, or the difference in opportunities, would that be magnified as a result of this
Yeah.
digital divide having grown?
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's one thing as well with you've got one foot in, of course, the academic world as well, and of course at higher levels of education. But is there also more sort of challenges to the education system as well, and going really right down to the very beginning, starting in kind of kindergarten level, that how to actually educate the population in terms of giving them the skills, knowledge, and expertise they need to be able to thrive in the new landscape and jobs market of today, but particularly tomorrow.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, there's more and more evidence coming around the impact of uh, you know, your environment in early childhood. I mean, there are even people who are talking about, your childhood, even in the gestational period. So we know that early
Yeah.
childhood definitely has an impact So and during COVID, obviously, the environment was very different across different families and different neighborhoods.
Mm,
Um, Now, schools therefore have and universities therefore have like, if you like, almost special duty to see whether they can kind of close this divide that had almost developed because of the shock.
yeah,
But so that's the primary thing. But there's one other thing I kind of want to point out. I think, and this is, as somebody in university education, this is a challenge for us. We are on trial. Are we
of course.
really in our curriculum equipping young people with the right skills? Because some of the great challenges in the world today, inequality, poverty, polarization, conflict, is the sort of traditional STEM education, which is excellent at problem solving and focusing. Is that enough for us to be able to make the kind of emotional and ethical judgments needed to be able to tackle these problems? And I think
Great
this is
point.
where universities have to understand that STEM
Yeah.
has to be combined with issues around emotional intelligence and building an ethical framework. So I think
Mm,
education really does need to adopt, and even within sort of STEM excellence, you see a huge difference between some of the top universities and those at the bottom. So I think, yes, we do have a challenge to both in upskilling existing STEM education, but also adding these elements of you know emotional intelligence and ethical, developing ethical frameworks.
right. And this is a really important point as well, because we're dealing with new technologies, and it's not just a kind of a machine in the way, especially when we get into sort of the whole artificial intelligence space, machine learning, and generative AI as well. I mean, we're really going down a different field now, which is it's uncharted territory for a lot of people and a lot of companies, organizations, and individuals. But of course, the skills needed, as you say, with the ethics behind it to make the right decisions, so that the framework and the paradigm we're working within is the right one that's going to allow us all to thrive and flourish, as opposed to bring out unexpected consequences and further issues further down the line.
Yes, absolutely, and this is where I sort of my work in the criminal justice and health sector have kind of opened my eyes so much to some of these issues. For example, we are using artificial intelligence or algorithmic decision making to
Yeah.
decide, who gets called for an interview, who
Mm.
gets bail, who gets the upper end of a sentence versus a lower end, or sometimes even a community sentence. So we are allowing artificial intelligence to make a lot of decisions. And I don't fall in the class of pessimists to say, oh yes, it's necessarily a bad thing, because there's also human bias. You can't compare machine bias to an unbiased human being. So
Right.
there
Yeah.
is. But the problem is, if the data, and this is sort of, there's this wonderful book around weapons of math destruction, if the data on which it is built or trained is biased, then what artificial intelligence can potentially do, and I say potentially because it can be corrected, do
Yeah.
is actually magnify some of these biases about, who gets in, the better jobs, who goes up the ladder,
Yeah.
who goes to jail and who doesn't. And I think that's the kind of challenge which is why data scientists need to work with social scientists and legal scholars to develop
Yeah.
responsible artificial intelligence and transparent artificial intelligence. You must know what's the model on which you're basing your decision. You don't just say,
Right.
oh, it's very complicated. It's a black box. We can't tell you. No, you have to be accountable, because you're
Yeah.
sending, you're making life-changing decisions for people.
Mm, mm. Yeah, no, this is it. It can't be just saying, "Oh, you wouldn't understand it. It's complicated."
Exactly.
That doesn't wash anymore. Even if
Yeah,
it ever did, I don't know if it was the case, but it certainly doesn't now, in terms of these, as you say, life changing and society changing
exactly.
technologies, which are, you know, over the past few months, we're not even talking years here, but months, the progress and the development and the evolution that we've seen within the technologies is really gaining speed all the time as well.
Mhm. Oh yes, absolutely. That's why I think somewhere in the book piece, each we say this is different, but I think we can really say this time is different because the pace of sort of evolution of technology is so exponential. And so one of the things sort of would say is that I think people need a more adaptable mindset rather than just, oh, technology, we skill ourselves, unskill, reskill. It's not necessary that all individuals or all organizations have to necessarily go after the next shiny technology.
Yeah.
What they should be prepared to do is develop the mindset to say, well, look, we have to adapt. We have to, maybe what we learn today may not hold tomorrow. We have to learn new things and do, and if we work with people who do things in a new way, we have to adapt to that. I think that's where, things around emotional intelligence, resilience, and all these kind of things come
Yeah.
in, because that's not the normal minds we work with, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, it really isn't. And I mean, Siddhartha, you were talking a little bit before as well about the whole idea of globalization. Of course, the rise in anti-globalist sentiment as well, and this is also something that comes out in the book. I mean, can you say a little bit more about that in this context?
Yes, absolutely. So starting with sort of the good part of globalization combined with technology have made it possible for anybody anywhere in the world to sort of, work and thrive in principle, right? So
Yeah.
so that's the whole idea again of the weightless economy, a world without borders, and some people, and that includes probably people like myself, thought, yes, this is it. This is, it's globalization is going to allow resources to flow to their highest valued use. The surplus from globalization, or the gains from globalization, would be so high that everybody would be pulled up.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, that hasn't happened, because, like everything else, globalization has, you know, there are certain rules, and some of the rules have been skewed towards certain groups of people, which has led to an increase in inequality,
Yeah.
particularly within country inequality. You mentioned before two-tier, three-tier workers. So
Yes.
some have really thrived and others have not. So even if absolute levels of poverty have gone down, it mostly has. The fact that, the rise of the 1% to the 0.1% to the 0.001% has been
Yeah.
so much that I think there has been a backlash against globalization, and because within each country you're seeing, greater amounts of inequality. Previously, it was, oh, America was more unequal than, was more better than India, and so the inequality was, say, between countries. Now, because of globalization, some people within every country, almost, okay,
Yeah.
let's leave out a few countries which have ongoing conflict, but otherwise every country has thrived at the upper end, but not so much at the lower end. Maybe
Mm.
ultimately they would, but we haven't really come up with a way to help those who've lost out, maybe
Yes.
temporarily because of globalization. And that has led to the rise of, these nationalist leaders, without naming any one individual in
Right.
particular. I think there was this whole thing about close the borders, stop migration, we have to
Yes.
look after ourselves first. And the problem is that their remedies, or their cure is worse than, if you like, the disease.
Yeah.
So I think I
Yes.
think I
Yeah.
think we have to understand, we have to make globalization work. We have to, have more equitable globalization. We can't just go back to having, borders, and people not being able to trade in not just goods and services, but in ideas. So the
Yeah.
question is, how do we make globalization work for everybody, rather than try to, artificially shut borders, which,
Yeah.
actually doesn't make a lot of sense anyway. You can't really, because you can't stop the flow of ideas.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think it's so important that this is kept open. I think it's also for the adaptation to the future as well, whether it's the education system, whether it's new platforms, services as well. This idea of sharing and being able to establish what is best practice, see what's working, and be able to roll it out for a larger percentage of the population, so that people can actually get used to it from different sides, of course, but just have the opportunity to be able to make use and facilitate what's actually happening.
Yes, absolutely. And there's so much that you can learn from other, both success stories and failures.
Yeah.
So for example, the sort of East Asian miracle that people talk about, often, at least if you look at some of the initial papers on this was like, oh, yeah, they opened up markets, liberalization, etc. That played a big role. You did
Yeah.
let markets. But what also played a big role was government made sure that it intervened in things around education.
Mm.
It ensured that the terms of trade were equitable. It also looked after the fact that, well, you need a safety net for people who are losing out. And
Right.
that's why you didn't have this backlash there when it globalized. So I think, yes, free trade does benefit the world as a whole, the sort of
Mm.
sum of, but not everybody is going to gain at the same time. And I think you do need some kind of intervention to, if you like, in a way, compensate the losers or make sure that they don't lose forever. So how do you handle that? And I think, education, as we mentioned before, is one of the big drivers of access and to a more equal world. It's a big driver of whether people will thrive. And I think if you
Yeah.
do those basics right, by as in a sort of functioning state, then of course you use the power of the market and the power of globalization
Mm.
to make it a success story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think we see some examples here in Europe as well, of course, countries like Finland and Estonia who have really focused on teaching, the teaching profession and education more broadly, to really put resources, time and effort to make sure that the population have the knowledge and expertise to be able to develop and make the most of any opportunities that may be able to arise. And I think that's an absolutely essential piece within this whole process.
Absolutely. And I think if you look at some of the inequality, for example, in the United States, or even in the UK, I think inequality in education is a big issue. In fact, in the morning I was talking about issues around um, the impact of so people talk about the school to prison pipeline, right? So absence
Right.
from schools and things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you see that there's this intersectionality which is important, because the kids who are absent from schools are also probably from areas where teachers and the school itself don't have resources to be
Right.
able to look after their needs. So that's the whole point. And that's why you see this huge thing in the UK about house prices going up, because of where the best schools are located. But
Mm.
really, what you want is that all schools should be good, or at least good enough.
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
this inequality in access is increased inequality, for example, in the UK, definitely in the US. I mean,
Right.
so I think that's why places like as you say, Finland and Norway have done such a great job.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, and I think because they have, and they've also sort of taken on this role of workplace training. Actually, businesses are far more willing to pay higher taxes. So it's not
Right.
it hasn't necessarily disincentivized industry, because they know, well, the training needs of workers are taken care of. They come, we don't have to invest in that. And therefore, they trade that off and pay slightly higher taxes. So it's much more complex about, what kind of interventions uh, work, and how firms or private enterprise can work with government.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think this is really sort of important points. And if I ask you, Siddhartha, to get your crystal ball out and look into the future as well, in terms of what's coming next in the future of work, and also some of the things that we should be looking out for. But of course, as individuals and consumers, what should we be preparing for as well to be able to make the most of the opportunities as and when they arise?
So these are all the questions you actually wish you hadn't answered, because inevitably with change, you will be wrong. So, but I think but that's the whole point. I think in the book we do say we could have taken one of two tax. We could have waited for the dust pandemic to settle and make more
Yeah.
sort of concrete predictions, or we just, while the data is still in flux, make a prediction. So let me go ahead and make some predictions anyway. Okay, so
Please.
first of all, okay, right. So first of all, we are sort of on the cusp, if you like, where the world can kind of fork into two different places.
Yeah.
One, we could be greater inequality, the rise of demagogues, democracy in peril, uh, global conflict. So that's one path. AI being therefore used as a tool of destruction. That's one part. The other part is, finally sense prevails. We go from we make use of the great opportunities that the globalized world and AI
Mm.
uses. But then, and I'm hope as an optimist, that's where we will. But for that, we need some of the issues that we discussed.
Yeah.
Investment in education, investment in building emotional resilience in workers, investment in looking after aging population. I think no leader wants to have a serious discussion about this. The population is aging, the dependency ratio is going up. We have to worry about how to pay for the healthcare needs. And there will be some choices to make, but nobody wants to have a discussion about it. But if we do, I think we can come up with solutions. In fact, use the power of technology and AI and data science,
Yeah.
as well as our inner resilience. Sometimes, with all this discussion going on, we forget that as individuals, we do have that capacity to look to ourselves and try and thrive. But for that, we need to be able to have that mindset to be able to almost, you know, destroy what we've created. So if you think, no, this isn't working, let's recreate. So I mean, we sort of, I won't go into the huge details about that. We do have this little analog in the book in the end where we say, well, that's the mindset you need. You build this, you attach to it, and then you almost drown that because and then build again on a fresh canvas. And I think if we do that,
Yeah.
the tools are there. You can succeed in this globalized milieu. And that's where I really, really hope we will go, and not in the first scenario. I'm an optimist. I just hope ultimately that's where we will go.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I think sort of being an optimist and proved wrong is better than being a pessimist and proved right as a starting point anyway, Siddhartha. So I will join you on that one as well. But it really has been fantastic to hear your thoughts and insights on these crucial topics, and hope that you'll be able to come back and revisit some of these themes and talk about the developments and progress that's been made.
It's been a pleasure, Glenn, and I'll look forward to having more discussions with you. And thanks for having me.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.